Now we're going to ratchet it up with an illuminated switch. This one is not a momentary switch. This is a push on, stays on, push again, stays off. And you guys can see the illumination very well, but if I turn it all the way off, there you go. Push on, push off. Illuminated switch. This is what we're wiring up next. We're going to be introducing, of course, since it's illuminated, we're going to be introducing 12 volts. This particular switch has 5 wires coming from it. Now, don't panic, just calm down. It's not that hard, actually. Now, what's nice about these particular Angel Eye switches is that you do not need a relay to make them function for the simulator. We're going to get to that in the next stage. A lot of times, say when you have gang switches, such as these, or other illuminated switches, such as these automotive switches, these ones will not pass 12 volts to the switch assembly itself, so it's safe to hook up to our Leo board. The problem with these ones is that you apply 12 volts, when you flip the switch on, they will send out of these spade terminals an actual 12 volts to whatever you're going to power, because it's actually supposed to be an automotive application, such as winches, lights, whatever. You put 12 volts to your Leo board pin, your controller board pin, and you're going to fry this thing. Fortunately for you, I will show you how to wire these up correctly, but you need relays. Because you're dealing with 12 volts, you need to isolate that 12 volt switch. We'll get to there. So the point is, these particular switches, they only need 12 volts for the Angel Eye. They're on all the time. These other switches are isolated, meaning you can hook these wires up directly to your game controller board, and you're not going to fry anything. Now, if you got a particular switch and you don't know, I don't know if this is going to send out 12 volts to the Leo board or not. That's okay. Just get your voltmeter out. Hook up your 12 volts. I'm going to ground this one out. And we're going to hook up our hot wire. So now the switch is glowing. Take your voltmeter and simply test the wires and see if you have any stray voltage. And of course, it's 0 because the 12 volts for this particular switch, don't let those touch, the 12 volts for this particular switch is only powering the luminescent LED on there. Of course, you also want to check your voltmeter to make sure your voltmeter is hooked up correctly. As we see on the voltmeter, we have 11.45 volts, so close enough to 12 volts. Now we can see that there's no voltage in here whatsoever. All right, it's all dead. That means you have a perfectly isolated switch that you can safely hook up to your Leo board or any other controller board that you have without shorting anything out. I do recommend you guys get a voltmeter for this, but in a real pinch, it should be obvious. When you hook up these automotive gauges, look how thick these are. These are 16 gauge wire. These are pretty dang on thick wires. Look how razor thin these are. That should be a telltale clue if your terminals are going to be pumping out 12 volts or not. But again, ultimate test, please use a voltmeter. You can get the cheap ones like the $5, $10 ones at Harbor Freight or online on the Amazons with no muss, no fuss. We're just doing very basic low voltage testing. Now, before we go any further, we need to talk about 12 volts. From here on out, I'm pretty sure we're going to be using 12 volts. And if you want to have fancier light switches, you're going to need 12 volts to power these. Say if you got an ignition switch, you want to key it on, and you want actual lights to come on, you're going to need 12 volts for that. You want to get really fancy and hook up some LEDs when you pull the light switch out, and like you have RGB lights light up or whatever. You will hook them up to your real light switch. You're going to need 12 volts From here on out, we're pretty much going to be using 12 volts to power everything. Now, how can we get 12 volts to here? You guys are going to most likely need 12 volts if you actually want to be creative and not use rudimentary, momentary button switches. We're going to need 12 volts to hook up some fancier, much fancier switches. We love fancy. Absolutely, darlings. So, what we can do to supply 12 volts, you can go on to Amazon or eBay. Be careful of those. You can type in 12 volt power supply and you will get a whole bunch of listings for power bricks. That's kind of what they're called, like laptop power bricks. As well as bench testing power supplies. Some of them then will come with a barrel connector that comes out of the plug. So you plug it into the barrel adapter and you can plug in your 12 volts through there, through the two terminals there. Pay attention to what's positive and what's negative. Again, a voltmeter is a very good thing to have. They're dirt cheap, very good to have around, especially for instances like these. And you simply plug them in. This is a PC power supply, if you guys may notice. There is some old school Molex connectors on here. A little bit newer. It's got SATA power, whatever. And I simply hot wired it to give me my 12 volts. This is my ground tap, and this is my 12 volt taps. Now, this is for entertainment purposes only, but if you got one of these lying around, you can easily hot wire it to have your 12 volt bench power supply, or it might serve as you could use it as your regular button box power supply, although these are severely clunky. Entertainment purposes only, but if you're ever curious and want to go down the rabbit hole, there's plenty of videos on how to hot wire these things. Basically, you find the only green wire that you can find coming out of the box, and you ground that out. And then when you plug it in, like here, it will automatically start up. And what's nifty about the computer power boxes, you have all these ground wires coming out. You've got your 5 volt rail. You've got your 3.5 volt rail, that's your orange. And then, of course, your 12 volt rail will be your yellow wires. Excellent. And that's basically how you hot wire one of these things. Pretty simple, stupid. This particular switch has 12 volts going to just feed the angel eye. That's all it does. Well, how do I know if I have one of these types? Well, obviously, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 wires coming out of there. A lot of times, these switches themselves, will actually note it on the terminals. So as we can see here, we have a plus for this terminal, and we have a negative for this terminal. And then we actually basically have 2 circuits we can use for this. We have a common, which is down here, a normally open switch, and a normally closed switch. Now we're going to get into normally open and normally closed switches. This is important because we're going to be doing relays, and it's going to be based off the same principle or idea. Normally open means when the switch is resting in its normal position, it's going to be an open circuit, meaning electricity will not be flowing through. I will draw a diagram out here in a second, but the theory on these normally open and normally closed is when the switch is off, or in its normal resting phase, which for us, we'll just leave it off. We'll call that normal. We'll call this abnormal, if you will. Like me. Meaning if you hook a wire up to your common terminal and to your normally open terminal, nothing's going to happen. Normally open circuit. It's an open circuit. It's not a closed circuit, so things won't flow at all. I'll draw a diagram here in a second. However, if you hook up your voltmeter, or your ohm meter rather, and go from your common to normally closed switch, that will actually have continuity. It is normally closed. It is a normally closed circuit. So this circuit is actually allowing a complete circuit from this terminal to this terminal because it's normally closed, a normally closed circuit. Let's draw a diagram and I'll show you what that looks like on paper. All right, so this is my wiring diagram I made up. I made this actually weeks later than what you guys just saw just a second ago. Ignore this bit. This is when we get into our relay system. We're not worried about relays right now, but it is important to know the normally open and normally closed switch on here. because once we get into the relays, they also have normally open and normally closed switches, and that will help functionality in the SCS software, namely American Truck and Euro Truck simulators. So what we got here is we have a common wire, in which case it's this guy right here. And when the switch is in its normal resting position, you have two internal switches, actually. You have a normally closed circuit and a normally open circuit. When it's in its natural resting phase, when the switch is in its natural resting phase, like you see here, it's nice and flush, you will have continuity to one side of the switch, actually, a normally closed switch. You can think of this as button 1 that you can set for a primary or secondary key binding. When you push the switch, then all of a sudden we flip-flop down to here. Now that circuit's become disconnected, but now it's feeding the normally open circuit part of the switch. And you can use this for a second button, primary or secondary key binding, etc., etc., etc. So basically you've got coming in through here, and then depending upon the switch, if it's off, it's going through the normally closed section of the switch. So these two wires will connect up to your board, your game controller board. And when you push the switch in, this flip-flops, and now this button has become disconnected, but now this switch works. So you can actually get kind of complicated with your circuitry and have multiple functions basically run off of one physical switch. And fun little tidbit, all of these outside pins on the Leo board here and here, they're actually all connected. That's actually your common rail right here. These are all connected. So any of the green, this green wire, you can connect up to any one of the outside terminals, and they're all connected. It's the inside terminals here is what actually goes to the game controller for the actual button assignment, if you will. So if we get our ohm meter here, if you notice, if I touch just one of these on the outside, I'm on the outside common plane, they all connect. It's the inside that does not connect. Outside, for this particular Leo board, outside is the common side. You can think of this as the electricity going out of the board to go to your switch, and then if you have the switch activated or not, that's what gets sent into the pins on the inside. A few boards are different, but basically that's the lay of the landscape. And the reason why they do that, it's just easy to run a common rail on the outside just to make the board smaller. And since we're not really sending any amperage through it, it's fine. So those outside pins on the outside, the common rail side, that's where this is coming into. So any one of these pins out here, that's your common input. And then if you have your wiring, you have button 1 and button 2, those will go to your inside of the pins here. Button 1 or button 2, your normally open and normally closed terminal will go either to your button 1 or button 2, primary or secondary key binding, etc. This is just to visualize in its current state. This switch has a normally open and normally closed switch. So right now, the normally closed terminal, which is for this particular button, it's the yellow wire. That's the normally closed terminal here. This will actually activate the switch right now. And so when we push the switch back in, then what happens is our normally closed terminal loses continuity, but instead the common gets switched down to here and simply runs that common out through the normally open terminal of the switch, which would be blue in this case. And you can hook that up to another switch. Cool. Hopefully that was pretty simple enough. So you have two virtual buttons you can control with one physical button. Cool. Let that soak in for a minute. And then we'll go back to actually wiring up this guy and put this to use. Now you may wonder, oh, we're going to plug it in. I won't be able to know which wire is which. Well, the switch is good enough. I'll actually say it on the connector as well. If you zoom in really close, you can actually see the letters there. There's your common, normally open, and normally closed. You can quasi-see them right there. Just take notes. It's all right. You guys will be just fine. Come on. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and hook up our connector. Not worried about our Angel Eye powered. We're not worried about that. Let's wire it up now and actually look at it. So I'll take 2 green DuPont wires. We'll hook them up to the outside. That's going to be the common side. Now, in theory, you could probably get away with 1 common outside pin wire. But if the pin's there, I would use it so you know for certain that that's properly grounded. It's going to be registered correctly. So you could grab your DuPont wire and shove it in here. Latch. Now it's crimped. Or I ripped this one off. You can also still use that. Maybe wad it up a little bit. And shove it in there. Crimp. Tug. Gently. That's solid. Even the motion simulator guys, that shouldn't wiggle out too much. And then we're going to take our common wire from our switch and add it all in. So now our common for our switch is also hooked up to our common rail on our game controller board. Perfect. Now with the yellow and blue wire, normally open and normally closed circuit, guess what? That's your button switch. You just put those 2 wires on any one side of this matrix here. Take our blue one, get it hooked up to a DuPont wire. Take your yellow one, hook it up to a DuPont wire. And we're ready to connect our buttons. Now taking a look at the wire right quick. Normally closed is the yellow one. Blues are normally open. Common is basically your ground, if you will. Also hooked up to the common side of the switch. Now we have our normally open switch, a normally closed switch. We're going to connect those next to our common or ground pin wires. So now we have our 2 common wires hooked up to one of the common wire section of our switch. Excellent. We have our normally open and normally closed circuits here. Those are our actual buttons. We just connect them side by side, here and here. And now, believe it or not, it's ready for the simulator. Keyboards and buttons. And we'll go say, diff lock. Oops. There's our diff lock. As you can see, I already kind of was messing about with it earlier. Okay. See how it says parentheses hold? That's actually pretty gosh darn important. Now, when I click it, okay, now we're programming it. It says either to press or hold. We want the hold feature on here. This is very important. We want the hold feature so when we're flipping back and forth fast enough, the simulator doesn't get confused. Think of the hold command that you see on the screen. Think of this as you're holding the switch. The button holds itself, but think of you constantly pushing the button or holding the button to make the button work. That's what we want. That will enable us to flip-flop back and forth fast enough without worrying about this potentially going backwards and on becoming off, off becoming on. We want the hold feature. We select it, we highlight it. Notice if we just push it on, the button on and off really fast, notice the hold here went away. Okay? We don't want that feature. We want the hold feature. Highlight it again, and now we're just going to simply push the button on. And we're going to hold it there until the hold, or keep the switch on until it says hold. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and release the button, and now that's programmed. So that's one of the 2 switches. The other switch, we will press first. Now the switch is on. And now we want to do the reversal. So exactly backwards. Click on here. And now we're going to release the button back to the off state. So exactly the opposite. And we're going to let it hold there, hold there, hold there until it says button hold. Excellent. And then you click the button again to deselect it, and we're good to go. So now, just for funsies right quick, let's go ahead and test this out. Start up our truck. We're going to release our parking brake. So now if we hit our switch, hey, our diff lock comes on, as you can see, right there on my dash, right above the speedometer. Click it off. Click it on, click it off. I would suggest don't push this button too fast, because if you go too fast, the game controller, the baud rate, it takes a second to get into the simulator. You might actually reverse it and on will become off will become on. So don't go like that the whole time. Treat it as if you would like you're driving a real truck. Nice, smooth, slow inputs. You shouldn't have to worry about it flipping. So now with our differential lock on, the button is still depressed. Let's just turn our engine off and see if it remembers. Turn our truck back on, and look at that. The differential lock still remembers where we're at. So use the hold button, and don't click this too fast. It's just nice. You can go like this fast, and that's about how fast as the game will get its input from you. It has to travel from the switch to the game control board to the simulator. It has to travel a long way, so don't go flipping these switches too fast. But you can, I'm 1/1000, 1/1000, 1/1000. I'm going about 1,000, about 1 second per switch, and it hasn't flipped over. If you go really fast like this, see now my differential lock is on, I push it, now it turns off. So don't go too fast mashing on your buttons. Now that I turn the light off, this might be a little bit better. Let's go ahead and use this as a parking brake. So we got our parking brake feature pulled up. We are in the normally off position or normally resting position. We're going to hit primary. We're going to push, and we're going to wait for the simulator to show us the hold, parentheses hold. Excellent, it did. We'll go ahead and release the button. Excellent. And now, for the secondary switch, it's going to be the exact opposite. We're going to push the button in first, then select our secondary command, and now we simply turn the switch off, and it registers the other side of the switch. Button 37. Excellent. And then we'll just cycle the switch on and off right quick to set that in the simulator. And now we got ourselves a parking switch. So, come back to here. So, I don't know if the parking brake is released or set yet. There you go. So now it's set. Isn't that nifty or what? But check this out. Oh no, it's actually backwards. I should push in to release. But when I push in to release, it sets the brake. The real trucks, you push your valve in to release the brake. So this should be released. But it's not, it's parked. Oh no, what will she do? Well, it's actually not that complicated. Now, if your button is wired backwards, it's not a big deal. This applies to latching switches only, not the momentary press. Just for latching buttons only. If you notice that your button is backwards, meaning the button's on, but nothing's happening in here, the wire is wired up backwards. So this would be on, and that would be off. If you notice that it's flip-flop backwards, really easy to fix. Hit escape, throw your switch the other way, and boom. That fixes it. You don't have to reprogram or rewire it. It's really that easy. And if that doesn't work, then you'll have to go in and swap your primary and secondary key bindings. But before you do that, try that trick first. If your button or switch is backwards, just hit escape, flip it the other way, hit escape again, and that should flip it right back up again. Parking brake is set, push it in, and it's released. Pull it out, parking brake is set.